So welcome everybody to Positive Pyjama Chats, and so grateful to have you here. It's really lovely to spend my Wednesday mornings hump day with you all. So you really make my week, and I hope that I help to make yours better too. We have been talking in Pyjama Chats over the last number of weeks about being in charge of our own happiness and reminding ourselves that we actually have 90% control over what happens in our, not so much what happens in our world, but how we respond to it and how it affects us inside. The best way we can be in control and feel in charge of our world is to focus on both what matters as well as the small things that we can control. Keeping our focus there means that we feel like we have more control, we feel like we're more in charge of our lives, and our ability to respond, to choose different actions and be really purposeful about what we're wanting to achieve, what outcome we are wanting to create as we move through from day to day and sometimes moment to moment in our day. Our ability to respond is crucial in how we feel. As we breathe, as we take a moment to just focus on how we want to create the spaces we move into. We were talking last week about a real opportunity to take not just a breath or three, but in that time for breathing, when we are moving from one activity to another, from work to home, home to work, study to work, from a task to a client and back again, from family to a client and back again, all those different things that we are moving between on a constant basis, as is life, moving from one space to another. We can go into that reflection mode. How do I interpret what just happened to me? How do I take with me the best parts? How do I take a moment to rest, to breathe, be present to what's going on inside, and take the best parts of that energy with us to the next space, the next activity, and reset? How do I want to show up in that next space? So being really deliberate about how we are taking the energy when it's positive and leaving the negative energy behind to show up in a really precise, specific, purposeful manner, showing up as we choose to, deliberately. And it was in last week's conversation that one of our participants really inspired me. And she was talking about the concept of, do we focus on one task or do we multitask? What's the difference and how can we really make an impact? And I found this quote. You may have read, Dan Millman has written many, many books. He's an amazing author, very, very spiritual in how he sees the world. If you haven't yet read any, I definitely an author I highly recommend. And he says, I learned that we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So at least not at the same time. So think of your priorities, not in terms of what activities you do, but when you do them. We all want to do everything, but timing is everything, according to Dan. So that got me thinking. And you may have seen a concept of filling up a jar. If we get stuck into the little rocks, the big rocks get forgotten. It's really easy to overlook the big rocks when we're stuck in the detail of the little ones. But if you can imagine filling up a jar, putting in big rocks into the jar, and the jar looks full, but then you pop in little pebbles and you can fill it up even more. And as the professor says in the little YouTube that you can get on this description, he says, do you think it's full? And of course the students say yes. Yes, it's full. And think about this in terms of our time. But then the professor pulls out a jar of sand and puts a few scoops of sand into this already apparently full jar. And the sand goes in. And he says to the students again, do you think it's full now? And the students have cottoned on by this point and they say, no. And the professor says, you're right. And he pulls out a jug of water and pours a couple of cups of water into this apparently full jar. So you can imagine we've got big rocks and pebbles and sand in this jar, and now we've got water. And now this jar is full. There's nothing else that you can put in this jar. But if you put the order around the other way and you put the water in first, you won't get the big rocks in. There's lots of little things that you can fill up your time with in your life. But what are the big rocks that really matter in your life? That really help you to show up happy, positive, deliberate, and purposeful? What are those big rocks? If you can, you may even want to put in a comment and tell me what those big rocks are for you. Because if we focus on the urgent rather than the important and forget those big rocks, we can get stuck there. What are those big rocks for you that are really important to make sure that they are all lined up? If we focus on the urgent and not important, things topple over. You can see that pile of pebbles looks like it's about to fall over. If we focus on the not important and not urgent also, you can see it started to fall over already. But if we focus on the important before it gets to urgent, we can get all of our ducks in a row and have the big rocks in our life really take the fore and really be sticking to where we're going, being deliberate about how we're showing up, being deliberate about what gets done, what gets created, and how our life comes together. Focusing on the important means that, hey, do you write lists? Most of us do. But it's taking that list to the next level that is the power. That's where you really get those big rocks to stand out. Because if we focus on the important rather than the urgent, then we can make sure also that we are focusing on the 20%. Have you ever heard of the 80-20 rule? Have you ever heard of Pareto's principle? Same thing. This is a way to work out what the big rocks are. You will notice that if you've ever had a job, you'll find that in that community of workers, 20% of the people get 80% of the work done. If you are a practitioner, you will notice that 20% of your clients bring in 80% of the money. Another 20% of the clients may well bring in 80% of the headaches. Who is it that you are focusing on? Who is it that you want more of? 20% is really, really powerful. 20% can make a big difference in our life. We get the greatest results from 20% of our effort. In any list that you're trying to put together of things that you want to create or get done, 20%. This really helps to fine-tune what those big rocks are. If you have a list of 10 things that you want to do today, and you choose 2 of them, just 2, you will find that 80% of what you wanted to create is created. The biggest impact, the biggest bang for your buck, the greatest rewards, and often the greatest fulfillment. People sometimes get stuck doing and trying to do things that they're just not good at. But if you can delegate some things and focus on the 20% that you are great at, you will also find that you get 80% less headaches, and you get 80% more fulfillment in your day. If you're in sales, you probably also find that 20% of the products you sell give you 80% of the revenue. These are really powerful concepts, focusing on the results that you get, the fulfillment that you feel. Who doesn't want to focus on those sorts of things? Can you imagine that if today your list of 10 things to do shrunk to 2, how much pressure is lifted off those shoulders? How much of a headache is gone? Just simply because you reduce that list down to 2 that you can do. Now, I took this one step further with a book that I read called Just One Thing. And in that book, he talks about choosing just one thing. One thing for you to focus on today. One thing that you can focus on this week or this month or this quarter. What is that one thing for you? If you can focus on just one thing, you will be amazed at what you can actually achieve. As Tim Ferriss says, doing less meaningless work so that you can focus on things of greater personal importance. It's not laziness, but this is a hard concept for most people to accept because our culture tends to reward personal sacrifice instead of personal productivity. But what he's saying is we can be more productive, we can be more energetic, more creative, have more space for the good things, the focus of things in our world if we are focused on fewer things. So focus on fewer but more important things and notice the power that that brings to your world when you're focusing on just one. Because as Mahatma Gandhi says, action expresses priorities. What are your priorities? Do you know what they are? If you don't know what they are, have a think about where you are being pulled. What actions are you doing? What are you finding yourself doing? Are they serving you or not? Actions speak louder than words in so many, many ways. What actions are you being pulled to do? Have a think about whether they are your just one or whether you need to change that. But this is where the power is. Focusing on fewer things to get the more important things done. What are you going to fill your days with? Because what you do today can improve all of your tomorrows. I wanted to discuss with you today in our discussion session a couple of different things. So have a think about what would be your number one and why. These are some categories in question number 2. Your health, your family, your career, your home. What of these are your highest priorities? And we will come to discuss these in just a minute. But before we open the discussion, I just wanted to thank you for joining us here at Positive Pyjama Chats once again. And I really look forward to hearing your thoughts on these priorities. Our surprise for next week is a great next step for some people's number one. I have a guest that I'm going to interview next week. This guest is a local chiropractor and he's currently doing a PhD in psychology. He's talking about the link between how we think and pain. Can you imagine people at home who are in pain and what their number one might be? Please, I invite you to come along next week. Let's have a chat and please open your videos and microphones so that we can chat about what your number one is. Are you also stuck in pain or do you have other priorities that you can tap into?